And so I would like to, I'd say give a round of applause, but we can't really do that. But Delegate Hodges, thank you for your service to the commission and the work you've done leading us. And as we move forward, we'll continue to do that great work. So with that, next up will be the election of a vice chair. So I'll open the floor for nominations for the vice chair.
Mr. Chairman, this is Keith Hodges. I'd like to make a nomination.
Go ahead.
I would like to nominate Senator Hanger as vice chair.
Do we have a second?
This is Delegate Weber.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for Senator Hanger. Are there any other nominations for vice chair from the floor? Seeing none, I will close the nominations for vice chair and I will call for the vote. All in favor of Senator Hanger serving as vice chair, say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries. Congratulations, Senator Hanger.
Thank you very much. Congratulations to you.
Next up, we have appointment of the fiscal agent. Eldon, you want to talk a little bit about this?
We can do that, but we will also need to do the members of the executive committee, but we could do it in whichever order you wish.
Since we're on the fiscal agent, let's do that and then we'll do the executive committee.
Okay, the fiscal agent, it's required under state code that the commission appoint fiscal agent each year. Since the beginning of the commission, the George Washington Regional Commission has served in that role and they're willing to continue. So we would just need a motion to reappoint them as fiscal agent.
Is there a motion to approve fiscal agent?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Second.
The motion's been made and properly second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
Motion is carried. I skipped ahead here, so let's go back to the executive committee. Eldon, would you explain the executive committee so the new members can have an understanding of the purpose?
Yes, sir. The executive committee exists under the commission's bylaws in case some action needs to be taken in between commission meetings that cannot wait. Most years the committee does not need to meet, but it exists just in that circumstance. Members of the executive committee include the chair and the vice chair, and one member each from the sub-regions of the basin, lower, middle, and upper. The lower basin being Lancaster, Middlesex, Essex, Richmond, and Westmoreland counties. The middle basin being centered by the city of Fredericksburg and the surrounding counties, King George, Caroline, Stafford, and Spotsylvania. And the upper basin being primarily the completely the Rappahannock-Rapidan Regional Commission area of Fauquier, Culpeper, Orange, Madison, and Rappahannock.
Thank you, Eldon. With that, we will start with the upper basin. Are there any nominations for the upper basin representative to the executive?
Yeah, this is Delegate Weber.
Go ahead, Delegate Weber.
I would nominate Elizabeth Guzman.
Is there a second?
McDougall, second, Mr. Chair.
The motion's been properly made and seconded. Are there any other nominations to the executive committee for the upper basin? Seeing none, I will close the nominations and call for the vote. All in favor of Delegate Guzman serving on the executive committee for the upper basin, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion is carried. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on your election and the vice chair as well.
Thank you. Look forward to working with you. Next, we will have the middle basin. Is there anybody that would like to make a nomination for the middle basin?
Just as a matter of information, the past 2 years, Supervisor Marshall from Spotsylvania has served as the middle basin member.
I don't mind continuing to serve, Eldon. I can get a nomination.
I will go ahead and make that nomination. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any other nominations to the executive committee? Hearing none, I will close the nomination and call for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? The motion is carried. Welcome back. And next up will be the Lower Basin. Is there any nominations from the Lower Basin?
Mr. Chairman, you were the representative for the past couple of years, so
Is there anybody on in the Lower Basin that would like to serve?
members who are on the line from the Lower Basin include, let's see, Supervisor Gills and Senator McDougal.
Is it normally we have people from the local government on the executive committee, or does it matter?
We've actually had both over the years.
Mr. Gill or Mr. McDougal, would y'all like to speak?
If Ronnie wants to do it, then I'll nominate him.
Mr. Chair, I will, this is my first meeting, but I will be glad to serve.
Thank you, Mr. Gill. The motion's been made, I believe, by Senator McDougal. So is there a second?
Second. I'll second that.
Okay, the motion's been made and second. Let's call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the motion is carried. Thank you all. Before we move on to, let's see, next. Oh yeah, excuse me. Next is the consent agenda. Are there any questions about the consent agenda? Okay, I will call for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved, Tom O'Halloran.
Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chair.
Okay, the motion's been made and properly second. All those in favor of the consent agenda say aye.
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 Okay, thank you all. The motion is carried. Next up, I would like to recognize Delegate Hodges for his years of service. We'd have a little reward we'd like to give him today. So let me pop this up here.
I think, Paige, can you, there we go.
So this is for his 5 years of service for the Honorable Keith Hodges as chairman of the Rappahannock River Basin Commission from 2015 to 2019. Again, I would just like to reiterate the great thanks we have for his service. We've accomplished so much over these years under his leadership, and we look forward to him continuing his hard work up there in the General Assembly, as well as a good steward of the river. Delegate Hodges, thank you so much, and we appreciate and we reward you today this little bit of our token of our appreciation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been an honor to serve. I look forward to working with you, but thank you very much.
Okay.
If we could pop that back out already.
And just so you know, I've got the real one right here.
Okay.
And I'll get it to you, Keith.
We'll have a proper celebration when we can get back in person.
Right.
Get the agenda back up here. Let's see, moving on. Next, we'll have the public comment. This can be a little bit difficult sometimes in this format, but if there's any members of the public, I would ask that you would come off mute and say, Mr. Chair, and identify yourself, and then I will recognize you to speak. So if there's any members of the public today who would like to speak to the commission and make a comment, please go ahead and identify yourself now.
Mr. Chairman, this is Brian Hoffman with Friends of the Rappahannock.
Brian, go ahead.
Congratulations to you and all of the new members. Brian Hoffman, Deputy Director, Friends of the Rappahannock, and also the coordinator for the Rappahannock River Roundtable. Just updating the commission, the Roundtable partners, over 100 folks, combined together this year, despite COVID, to plant over 21,000 trees in 14 counties of the watershed in the upper, middle, and lower basin. We've restored 8 acres of oyster reef, supporting local watermen in this time of need. Couldn't think of a better way to help support local business and social distancing than getting those great folks out to work restoring oyster reefs during this time. And on behalf of the Essex County Conservation Alliance and Scenic Virginia and Friends of the Rappahannock, we're pleased to announce that we're going to be pursuing a scenic rivers designation for the lower Rappahannock River. The upper Rappahannock River has enjoyed that designation and recognition for many years. And this is an opportune time where the administration has recognized scenic rivers, among other values, as in their Conserve Virginia app and portal, as a priority for ongoing conservation efforts. And not only will it help encourage ecotourism with that designation, it will help local projects, infrastructure, conservation easements, et cetera, score higher in that ranking if a designation of scenic was achieved. So our staff, and I think the coalition has recognized maybe 15 plus local partners throughout the 7 counties that this would impact. And we're going to continue to grow that coalition of support and be reaching out individually to each of the board of supervisors and city councils with information and the offer to present at those boards and councils. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for seeking that designation for the lower Rappahannock. Lancaster worked really hard in putting those towers underwater, and so that will help with that designation as well. Any other members of the public who would like to address the commission today? Thank you all. I will close the public comment. Next up, we'll have the report from the General Assembly. It was a very busy session up there this year, even given all the things that were going on. I'm going to go down the list here that I have and just kind of call you all in order. So give me just a second to pop this list up. First up, Senator Hanger, 24th District.
Yes. Well, here we are in the middle of June, and we generally by that time forgot what we did back in January and February. And probably this year it doesn't matter that we forgot, because we probably won't do it anyway with the circumstances that we're under here. But it actually was a good session for natural resources, specifically for our water quality programs. All subject to change, as everybody is aware now, as we will have to go back and revisit the budget based on where we are financially when the dust settles over our current economic activity that's been slowed down significantly. But for the Water Quality Improvement Fund, we came up with stabilized funding of $76 million roughly over the biennium. A lot of that, of course, focused on livestock stream exclusion. There was a dedicated increase to the soil and water conservation districts of $4.5 million from the general fund each year. There was a significant single-year investment in land conservation of $20 million. Well, that was over the biennium. Then there was an additional $15 million from the general fund for safety improvements for soil and water conservation district-owned dams. And in addition, there was some new staffing across the natural resources agencies. Again, we're going to have to revisit those numbers and see what we can do. There was a significant debate over, and other members may want to engage on this, and there were a lot of other issues that various members that my colleagues will probably want to address, but there was a significant debate over whether or not we would depart from voluntary incentivized BMPs, specifically livestock stream exclusion, or whether we would go to a regulatory format. And we ended up being able to win on the side of which I think was the right decision, of having continuing our incentivized voluntary programs. with the caveat that we're going to have to get busy and take care of business over the next 5 years, or we will be confronted on down the road, 2025, 2026, with the possibility of a regulatory format. So get an opportunity for the farmers to continue doing what they've been doing, the landowners continue doing what they are doing. And that's all I have at this moment.
Thank you, Senator Hanger. Next I have on my list, Senator McDougall.
I don't know that I have a whole lot to add over what Emmett said. He is, as he said, the budgets are going to be very challenging going forward for everything we do at a local level, and certainly for water improvement. So we have a lot of concerns about that, and are going to be very focused going forward to making sure we can protect as much as possible.
Thank you, Senator McDougall. Next up, I have Senator Reeves. I think Chris Snyder is here for Senator Reeves. Is that correct?
Yep. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Really nothing to add. I think Senator Hanger gave a pretty concise report.
Thank you. We'll move on now to have some delegates here. Delegate Cole, would you like to make any comments?
I do not have any further comments at this moment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Delegate Guzman?
No comments at this time.
Thank you. Delegate Hodges, do you have any comments?
Couple of things kind of caught me off guard. I forgot about this portion. Trying to think back, we had one piece of legislation that dealt with the Chief Resiliency Officer and the Special Assistant to the Governor that really streamlines their ability to coordinate and work with each other to respond to flooding and to work on flooding issues. The other piece of legislation right off dealt with living shorelines, and it made it's actually when appropriate. It deals with energy and so forth. It changes the definition of a living shoreline so that when appropriate, they can actually be built to a FEMA standard. Too often, you know, we're building living shorelines and storms come in and they're taken down. So this will actually be built to a FEMA standard, and it will allow federal funds to be available to build these living shorelines to a FEMA standard. So that's all I have right off.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of my list. Is there any other members of the General Assembly that are present that would like to comment?
This is Delegate Weber.
Go ahead, Delegate Weber.
Just real quick, in regards to the stream fencing and that, it was definitely an educational experience in regards to how we need to move forward as a Commonwealth. And I was glad that Senator Hanger was willing to do the work along with Chairman Plum to find a good solution. However, currently I think with the current financial status in the Commonwealth and the economy moving forward, we're going to have to work even harder to try and do more with less and make sure that our agricultural community continues to improve upon the water quality without being impeded by regulatory frameworks, because I think the other thing that has happened is that the general public has become much more aware of how important agriculture is to their daily life, and particularly how important we farmers are to selling them beef and vegetables and all that other good stuff. So we have a lot of work to do, particularly within the current climate. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Weber. Is there anybody else from the General Assembly that would make any comments? Okay, we'll move on. Thanks for those reports. I think we're going to give time to Greg, still waiting on Greg Evans to come in, so we're going to skip ahead to number 8 on the reports and hear from Terry Lasher and opportunities with Sentinel Landscapes.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, members of the Commission and our partners and guests. Since our last meeting in December, we have had several changes to to Sentinel Landscapes and into the business environment, as has been duly noted throughout the meeting so far this afternoon. Initially, we were advised that an RFA would be expected in January of 2020. Then it was in the first quarter. Then we had some rule changes that needed to be updated for the application process. It wasn't ready for release, and then we were told we should anticipate some sort of an RFA in the fall of 2020. Now that's been bumped once again due to all the budgetary constraints and things that are going on. So our Sentinel Landscapes efforts have been pushed to expect an RFA somewhere around January of 2021. We've also been advised that they were only going to be looking, the Federal Coordinating Committee would only be looking for 3 total applications or 3 new designations across the country. And our approach of having Virginia apply for 2 of those looked like that was going to be a pretty steep hill to climb. As a result, we went ahead and kind of re-proposed a couple of different landscapes and decided instead of going with 2, we would have 1 large landscape that would have 4 different subgroups within it. Those subgroups were already identified in the initial approach of having AP Hill, Fort Pickett, Quantico, and Joint Base Langley Eustis. And they'll be now the new subgroup leads. We've been working more specifically and more deliberately with the Department of Defense. Kristen Thomasgard from the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense of Sustainment and Infrastructure, as well as Bruce Beard, who's the Associate Director of Texas A&M's Natural Resources Institute, who really kind of guides and advises the REPI program. Based upon their advice, we changed from that 2 corridors to 1, entitled it the Virginia Security Corridor, still maintaining the original 5 goals that were identified by the partnership. We now just have that 1 with these 4 subgroups, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get something pushed through soon. We've also strengthened our team by adding Rear Admiral Ann Phillips and her vast knowledge of the coastal resiliency, as well as her leadership, has been a kind of a real nice addition to push some of our newer initiatives forward. Based upon the advice from the DoD, we're assembling a state-level coordinating committee to reflect the membership of the Federal Coordinating Committee, which is really the decision body of which landscapes are going to be accepted into the program. This strengthens our approach through aligning with the federal agencies like NRCS, Department of Interior, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, etc., as well as senior military and non-military partners. And so what we'll do with these 4 subgroups in our state coordinating committee is basically assist with formalizing the approach for ongoing communications, growth of programs within those subgroups. We'll address installation leadership changes by providing some continuity and guidance as their leadership changes. Most of the commanders are in each of the installations for about 2 years. So with that kind of changeover, having some more subgroup advisors and having a state level coordination will allow us to adjust for those changes. It'll also help us assist with some of the legislative and policy adherence, some promotional items and changes in any of the legislature that's needed, and will allow us to also renew and look at some of the tools that we have at our disposal for acquisitions and easements and things like that. I think that's about all I have at the moment, so I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you for that report. Are there any questions, Terry? Okay, thank you. We will go on to our next report. Is Greg Evans here now, or should we continue on?
It looks like Greg is unable to to join us due to some technical difficulties this afternoon.
Eldon, are you all ready to give that report, or should we just go on and come back to it?
We can give that report. I'm going to, I've got Greg's notes. I think Greg is actually on the line, but he's unable for us to hear him. And what he wanted to do was give a kind of an overview, especially for the new members, of what the Healthy Watershed Project has been. The original project premise is that retaining more forest land would protect and enhance healthy watersheds by reducing our nutrients and sediment loads, thereby reducing the slope of the current TMDL 2025 projections for the localities of the Bay watershed. So therefore, if localities, private landowners and others take actions to retain forest land, and those actions result in a decrease in the actual load over the 2025 projected TMDL load allocation land cover, and two, those decreases subsequently reduce the probable future offset costs that localities within the regions could face by 2025, then a way to credit localities and others for retaining forest land now through the Chesapeake Bay model would be considered. That goes back to phase one. EPA and the Chesapeake Bay program agreed and asked us to beta test some assumptions that that was then the draft version of the 6.0 TMDL model. And we used the pilot area of the George Washington Regional Commission of the Rappahannock Basin as the study area. Following EPA protocols, we ran 4 different development scenarios and ran those through modeling, and DEQ conducted the model runs. The results were significant in terms of potential reductions of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment, and that meant it could save millions of dollars in offset gray infrastructure costs. That led EPA asking us to conduct a phase 2 of the project, which was to have Virginia partner with Pennsylvania, being the 2 largest land areas within the Chesapeake Basin, have Pennsylvania do a peer review of our phase 1 work and attempt to replicate it. And then for Virginia to conduct an outreach effort across the whole Rappahannock Basin to identify policies, incentives, programs that could be utilized to incentivize local governments and landowners to take action to conserve existing forest land. Pennsylvania's validation effort proved successful. They replicated our work. In actuality, they didn't see quite as big a benefit as we did, because their stream area they used was in the Yellow Breeches watershed, which was had really no urbanized area, whereas we had urbanized area in our study area. The Virginia effort, we had conducted over 60 outreach meetings with every stakeholder up and down the basin. Local government representatives, private landowners, forest landowners, developers, and commissioners of revenue, and on, and identified a kind of a toolbox of regulatory and non-regulatory land use policy and incentives and tax policy incentives that could be used. That process led to a series of recommendations of potential policies, and was met with a positive reaction from the Bay program. They then asked us to move to a phase 3, and those results coming out of phase 1 and phase 2 led to the Chesapeake Bay program, including in phase 6 of the model, 6.0 of the model, a best management practice credit for conservation of existing farmland. So one of the initial goals back at phase 1 was accomplished by the time we got to phase 2. Phase 3 was to test implementation, and in phase 3 we selected 2 pilot jurisdictions, Essex County and Orange County. We went in with a consulting team and looked at their land use and tax policies, made a series of recommendations of changes they could make, and adjustments to either the comp plan or their land use ordinances or their land use value taxation program, and did that in both counties. And working with a private sector partner to identify how to incentivize private investment in water quality. And in the course of that process, identified that the most likely positive outcomes could be achieved through using carbon as a proxy for water quality because of the activities that are going on in the worldwide carbon market. In that phase of the project, or that portion of phase 3 of the project, we interviewed forest landowners and found significant interest on their part in identifying additional ways to generate income streams for forest land. One of the things identified in phase 2 was that for the forest landowner, all the investments up front, all the return is at the end, and all the risk is, if it's hardwoods, 70 years long in the middle, and a lot of that risk was borne out in state and local tax policy. So that if additional revenue streams could be identified for the forest landowners, it encouraged or incentivized them to stay in the market. In working with the investor consultants, team that we had on board, identified that there is the interest in investing in carbon sequestration and paying landowners to do that, but we had a scale problem, and that the worldwide markets, the buyers, if you will, did not want to invest in anything less than $50 million. Well, somebody with 100 acres certainly couldn't play in that market. And that led to identifying the need to create some mechanism of aggregating individual landowners so that they could access that private capital that exists worldwide and is interested in investing in buying carbon offsets and carbon sequestration. That led us to a recommendation and legislation that was considered and was successful in the 2019 General Assembly session to amend the Industrial Development Authorities Act, which also is known as the Economic Development Authorities. Those terms are interchangeable under the law, to make it clear that an IDA or an EDA could serve the purpose of an aggregator to access carbon markets. That legislation, as I said, was successful, and things really were moving well into 2020, working with both our pilot counties, and multiple private firms were interested in pursuing, and then we ran into the whole reason why we're doing a virtual meeting, COVID-19. And that just disrupted the whole process for us. We are currently in discussions with Fauquier County, as well as Orange and Essex. Fauquier has expressed an interest in stepping forward to see if they could help facilitate the funding mechanisms that we were going to use to help create the organizational documents that would be needed for the IDAs. Because of the COVID-19 situation and what's happened with the state budget, those funds are no longer available or accessible to us at this point. And that delay could go on for a year or so. We're not sure exactly which. An alternative has been recommended by our private consultants who have used a private mechanism in the Mississippi River Delta, and that has been successful. The private team that was part of the earlier phase 3 work, Green Trees, and they are currently in discussions with Fauquier County about how to structure a private deal that would mimic what would be done by the Economic Development Authority in order to move things forward. With the help of Greg Evans, we met with the State Forester and with Secretary Ring, explained the situation. They were supportive of this private approach in order to keep things moving, with the idea that we will return to the EDA, IDA approach as we move past the budgetary impacts of the pandemic. At this point, there's still discussions going on between Green Trees and Fauquier as to what that would look like. As we move that a little farther along, the hope is to bring Orange and Essex back into the picture. Hopefully, in a matter of weeks or months, we'll be at that point. And I think I've covered Greg's report about as well as I could. And hopefully, Mr. Chairman, I didn't drone on too long.
Thank you. No, I think that was a pretty thorough covering. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is Keith Hodges.
Go ahead, Keith.
Make a comment? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Eldon, great synopsis, covering a lot of ground in a short amount of time to bring everyone up to speed. But just to let everyone know, this is a really big deal moving forward. The project that the commission has undertaken not only is a water quality initiative, but has the potential to incentivize landowners to retain their land in forestry and bring dollars into the Commonwealth that basically are being left on the table. And these are not small dollars. This is a tremendous amount of money. So every time a plane lands in Dallas, they have to be, carbon neutral. They need to offset that. And to purchase those carbon credits, those will filter down as we've aggregated, as Eldon said, into the landowner's hands. And if I recall, Eldon, this is a $32 trillion worldwide market.
It's a huge number.
It is a huge number that will come in money that's basically been left on the table that this commission is working on to bring those dollars into the landowner's hands.
And Mr. Chairman, in an email note I got from Greg, he wanted me to personally thank Delegate Hodges for all his help with the legislation in 2019 and all of his support the last several years, and to thank everyone on the commission, and his apologies to Orange and Essex that we got so disrupted with the pandemic that we've been kind of struggling to get back on our feet.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments?
This is Emmett. Got a comment. I got a note that says that Greg is retiring. So I guess we need to thank him as well for all his work and wish him all the best.
Definitely. He has really been the leader on this and worked really hard, moving in positions from when he first started to now moving on to greener pastures of retirement. So I'd just like to, on behalf of the commission, thank Greg for his work on this and service to the Commonwealth over his years of working. So thank you, Greg. I know you can't see us or maybe not hear all of us, but we'll give you a round of applause. And with that, we can move on to our next report. And I have upper and middle rain gauge, stream gauges, Dan Bradway from VDEM.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you can. Go ahead, Dan.
Hey, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commission members. This is Dan Bradway. I'm with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. I've presented several times with the Commission before. I have no slides, so I'll just brief verbally. So this report is on the Rappahannock River Gauge installation project, where we're installing a series of rain and stream sensors to provide early warning and monitor flood conditions. The secondary purpose of the project is to evaluate new and emergent sensor technologies, including utilizing cellular and iridium satellite communications, as well as Internet of Things connectivity. The sensors will be integrated into VDEM's integrated flood observation and warning system. And the project is a partnership between VDEM, Rappahannock River Basin Commission, as well as the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate, as well as participating localities. So progress since last report has been limited. VDEM has been activated at the State Emergency Operations Center as essential staff since March 13th in support of COVID-19 response operations, and we really haven't slowed down since then. Due to the imminent threat to public health and safety, the Unified Command and VDEM leadership directed that all non-COVID related projects be put on hold to focus staff efforts on pandemic response until further notice. In addition to COVID-19 response, we've also been performing incident management for the ongoing Second Amendment events across the Commonwealth. Because of this, we haven't been able to make much progress in the last several months. We have identified 24 potential sensor sites. We identify those sites in coordination with the Commission as well as participating localities. We have actually received the physical sensor equipment. The next step is to finalize the legal agreement between Department of Homeland Security and VDEM, also known as a CRADA, a Cooperative Research and Development Agreement, and we're still kind of squaring away the details on that. Our collaborating partners, including DHS, VITA Project Management Division, as well as Progeny, who is the sensor manufacturer, are all informed, and we're keeping in close contact. We will resume the project as soon as practically possible. And that concludes my brief. I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Are there any questions from Commission members? I just thank you for the report. I know this has been, for the new Commission members, this has been on the agenda for us for a really long time. And I think staff changes and equipment changes and things down the line have made this drag on for a while, but this is a very important project for emergency and monitoring stream flows, and not only that, but potentially water quality as well. We will move on to our next item, our next report. Fredericksburg River Steward Program, Diane Byer.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Eldon, do you have my slides? We can't hear you. You're muted. There we go.
You're right, Diane. I was talking to myself. I was telling you we were getting the slides up right now.
I'm used to that over the years. Okay. We have been asked to discuss with you a little bit our riparian lands program, and there was a little bit of confusion I'll start off with at the beginning, just to say that the River Steward Program is a wonderful program that the Friends of the Rappahannock are administering. So if that's not something that the Basin Commission has heard about, it may be something that you want to schedule in the future. Today you have me. I'm the Director of Public Works. I'm also the City Arborist for Fredericksburg, and also the de facto Environmental Manager for the City of Fredericksburg. I also have here with me Officer Joe Young. He is my Watershed Manager and can answer any questions once we get done with the presentation. Next slide. So the property that we have, our watershed management area, is about 90 miles of waterfront property in several counties. You can see them listed there. The total acreage is about 4,800 acres at the time. At this time, there was a watershed planning process initially when this was purchased, and we'll go into that in another slide. And in 2006, the entire area was placed into a conservation easement with several partners. So we'll talk about that further along in the program as well. Next slide. So the watershed planning process basically started in 1991. Council adopted the watershed property management policy, and then staff was tasked to develop a watershed plan. And basically, staff had nothing to go on. It was a diverse group of upriver jurisdictions and interest groups, and that group was to identify issues, values, potential policies, etc. And they met quarterly for several years to develop a watershed plan. In 1994, the staff presented and council adopted the Rappahannock River Watershed Plan, which is basically still in operation. The basics of that talked about the overall narrative of the upriver watershed and talked about specific policies for city-owned land. Some of those are that we wanted to enact resource protection using concept of limits of acceptable change. And we wanted responsible use. So the city-owned acreage, this is something we kind of struggle with from time to time, and Joe is a very good educator on this fact, but this city-owned acreage is not public land like a national forest. We do allow certain uses, but it is not the public's right to just come onto the property and use it at will. Public ownership, where the city retains the ownership rights, is basically how we try to educate folks. We do that to try to protect the resource, which is obviously the water, which is the drinking water supply for the city of Fredericksburg. The Watershed Committee continued to meet. It had an upriver focus for most of that time. It was eventually replaced by the Rappahannock River Basin Commission, which has an entire watershed focus. There was a historic resources study done along the entire watershed property. That included cultural resources like canals, mills, gold mines. There are all sorts of cool things out there on the watershed that we're always discovering. So that resources study guide is here in Fredericksburg. If you're interested in reading that, let me know and we can get you a copy of that. In 2004, the Embry Dam was breached, removed, and the entire river is now unimpeded. Recently, as we brought Joe into our fold as watershed manager, he has basically taken the police forces and the city's community-based policing concept one step further and applied it to the watershed property. And we will talk about some of his initiatives and programs that have even been awarded throughout the state. Next slide. So in 2006, council did the resolution that put the land into easement. It created the Riparian Land Stewardship Fund, and that money came from the partners, which again we'll talk about in a few minutes. And it is currently supported with general fund monies because, as you know, as we all know, sometimes the best laid intentions don't pay for the best laid supplies. So what that pays for currently is our watershed manager, Joe Young. He has a specially outfitted truck, an ATV that he uses to monitor and police the watershed, and a kayak that he uses for rescue and some other initiatives and just for general monitoring. We also have a drone now that I did not put on here, but we also have a drone. Joe is a certified pilot, and so we use that for monitoring the watershed property as well. We also use the monies for land management activities like forest management. I'll show you a special habitat that we found a few years ago with a wonderful stand of hemlocks, and we're looking at preventative treatment of that area. Trails and gates to keep the upkeep of trails and gates, and general watershed cleanups. Next slide. So the advantages of an easement for the city, we can basically keep development out of this special area, and that of course helps us incredibly with watershed protection. We can also say that there is to be no vegetation removal as far as timbering and so forth. We can also manage for the invasives and the special habitats as we just discussed. We can also limit and monitor the use of the property. And again, like I said, it's private property, so we can manage it as private property with the special goals that we have, which we'll talk about in the next slide, I believe. Next slide. So the easement, our official easement partners are the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, the Nature Conservancy, and the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. And then we have other organizations. I've just mentioned a few here. There are many more, but organizations that assist in stewardship. And some of those are listed: Fredericksburg Trails, Friends of the Rappahannock, Rappahannock Outdoor Education Center. Next slide. So this is Joe Young, and he was very upset with me that I put his pink camo picture in the presentation today. But I have to tell you a little bit about this picture. So Joe is very community oriented. He's a caring individual and really exhibits our abundant compassion city value to the utmost. He, of his own accord and with his own funds, had this pink camo made because he had a program for 2 years, I believe it was, where he was out on the watershed and did a social media campaign. And basically the deal was, if you find me and take a picture of me and post it on the city Facebook page, I'll donate $1 to breast cancer research. He did that all on his own. How much money did you?
That first year was over $800.
Over $800 the first year. So that's the kind of guy we've got doing this job. So he is a Fredericksburg police officer. He has 18, actually I was corrected earlier. He's now up to 18 years experience. He is sworn in all the jurisdictions where we have watershed property. That occurred in the past probably 12 to 18 months. And he's responsible for initiatives such as trash pickup in lieu of the person getting a ticket or being sent to jail. He's also responsible for the mile markers along the river to aid in rescues. And you can see a picture of one of those to the right there on the slide. We mentioned the drone footage of the property so that we can look at it as far as management. We can identify stands of certain kinds of hardwoods, softwoods, trees, see if there's any damage being done by insects or fire or so forth. He also is fantastic at building and maintaining adjoining landowner relationships, and he has several long-standing relationships who help us in management and monitoring. And if anything is happening on the watershed, they don't hesitate to give Joe a call and tell him, hey, you may want to come out here and take a look at this. We've had several arrests in the past few years with violators on the watershed, destroying property with ATVs, cutting down timber, that sort of thing. So he is active and he's not afraid to make those arrests, but that's not his first wish. And he was also integral in a 2019 BML Environmental Award that the city won. Next slide. So the visions and goals that we've got for the area, you can read them there. We've been talking about these all along. Next slide. So this is a special habitat that I was telling you about. And these are pictures from last fall, I believe. And you can see on the right there, I don't know what happened to her name, but we named that tree Sophia. And she is one of the largest hemlocks that I've seen in quite a while. I grew up in Southwest Pennsylvania, and that's my home state, home tree. And this is one of the largest, most beautiful hemlocks I've seen in a long time in a forest stand. So we did a survey last year with Department of Forestry folks to assess for hemlock woolly adelgid. This stand seems to be so isolated that there's nothing. It's healthy, but we are working on identifying funding to treat preventatively. Next slide. So what's next for us with the watershed property? We're currently, some of you may know that we're experiencing some difficulty in being able to access our land at the confluence, and you can see the overhead view of that. We have some landowners there that we're in a dispute with. We're trying to work with them, with Culpeper County, with VDOT, and we have had several meetings scheduled to deal with this issue, and COVID, just as I've heard in several other reports today, COVID got in the way and said, nope, that's not going to happen right now. So it's still very close to the top of my list to get the confluence access back. We have had some forward motion with VDOT, so we'll see if we can't keep that going once we're able to have another meeting. We've also talked about developing and implementing a permit program for the entire watershed, and we'll probably implement it in stages. So we'll probably do maybe the upper, middle, and lower parts of the watershed in an implementation stage. And that's going to allow an enhanced monitoring of the property. We'll know who's on the property or who that we have signed up to be on the property. That'll allow Joe, when he's out on the watershed, to be able to go up to someone and say, do you have a permit? And if they say no, that gives him an opportunity to say, well, let me tell you about the permit. He can hand them our educational materials and say, this is the property you're on. It's owned by the city of Fredericksburg. These are our goals. This is what you're allowed to do on the property, what you're not allowed to do on the property. And we would like you to get an annual permit, which we're kicking around maybe an up to $10 a year permit cost, just a little bit. It's kind of like free puppies. Free puppies are hard to give away, but if you charge $10 for one, then everybody wants them. So we're trying to kind of do something like that with the permit program. But that gives Joe a tool when he's out on the watershed to educate folks on the land, on the goals, on the river. And it also gives him a tool to grow more of a citizen monitoring group to provide more eyes in the field, which we've found is very, very effective. Next slide. And that's my program. I'm open for questions if you have time.
Are there any questions from commission members?
Mr. Chairman, this is Keith Hodges. I have a question.
Go ahead.
And thank you for the presentation. Certainly enjoyed that. As you know, I've been canoeing from Kelly's Ford down to at least Mott's Run for the last probably 30 years. This was the first year we actually missed in all of those years. And I usually give an update at this commission of the crazy things that happened on the river. But anyway, you mentioned issues with VDOT at the confluence. What type of issues are you experiencing with VDOT?
The issue at the confluence is it's along Richards Ferry Road, and basically there was our access to the confluence there was across a private individual's property. We had an agreement there. We had a little bit of a landowner dispute as to whether or not the gate was on the proper land. We corrected that. Joe corrected that. And then all of a sudden, the landowners decided that they didn't want to allow us to go in that way anymore. So we started researching and found out that Richards Ferry Road, the easement still exists all the way to the river for Richards Ferry Road. So we started talking to VDOT about the cul-de-sac there on Richards Ferry Road at the end of the maintained section. And there was a little bit of issue on who the cul-de-sac belonged to, whose land it was on, whether or not we could access using the easement along Richards Ferry Road that has never been abandoned, but just has not been kept up. So those are the sorts of things that we're trying to work through with VDOT. And it's just been, just like any other state agency, it's been difficult to get two people to say the same thing on 2 separate days. So we're working on figuring out how VDOT can help us get back into that area.
Thank you. And there was, I mean, Eldon, you may remember this, or some of the other legislators. A few years ago, there was legislation passed. There's an MOU between DGIF, VDOT, maybe someone else. I don't know if that would help you at all or not. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Do you remember that, Eldon?
Not right off the top of my head, but that doesn't mean I can't be refreshed.
But there was legislation a few years ago.
In this particular area or in general?
Yeah, that was statewide, but there's an MOU that would allow public access of VDOT property. And there's an MOU between VDOT, DGIF, and there may be someone else. I don't think VMRC was involved in that, but there was legislation passed a few years ago.
Delegate Hodges, Mr. Chairman, this is Brian with Friends of the Rappahannock. I can address this if recognized.
Brian, go ahead.
Delegate Hodges is correct. There is an MOU existing with VDOT, DCR, and the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries that stipulates that if and when VDOT engages under maintenance activities or new crossing development, that they consult the other state agencies and identify opportunities for public access to the river. And there is a work group, that MOU work group with those representatives that meets periodically, quarterly, I believe, throughout the year. The best contact for that group is Robbie Rur, R-H-U-R, with DCR. She puts together the Virginia Outdoors Plan.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any other questions or comments? I see none. We'll move on. Thank you for that presentation.
You're welcome.
Let's see here. That was the last of the presentations, Eldon.
Yes.
So future meeting dates coming up. We have Madison County on September 23rd. As the newly elected chair, we're in phase 2 now of reopening Virginia, which allows us to have 50 people, I believe, in a meeting in person. Hopefully by that time we may be in phase 3, which I think it doubles that amount potentially. But I would like us to try as a commission to try to adhering to whatever social distance we need to at that point to attempt to have an in-person meeting of some kind, even if we have to have it outside.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I will work with our new member from Madison County, Cardi Yao, who was going to be on today's call, but was preempted last minute. I will reach out to him and we'll do some work to identify a location where we've got enough room that we can spread out. Make it a challenge for the usual call-in option. We may have to abandon that, but we won't say that at this point. We'll work to meet your request of an in-person meeting, sir.
Thank you. I think this we've all found over the course of this time of this can be a good tool, but it has some limitations. Heading up, is there any additional or potential agenda items for the September 23rd that members are interested in bringing forward at this time? Well, we've reached the end of the
Mr.
agenda.
Chair, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
This is Delegate Cole. I'm curious, I have the dates for all the next meetings, and I hope I didn't miss it. Will it still be at 1 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, a suggestion was made by Diane Beyer about hearing from the Friends of the Rappahannock on their River Stewards program. Since we'll be in the Upper Basin in Madison, would you Would members be interested in that at the September meeting?
I think that would be a good time to hear from that. So yeah, let's potentially schedule that and see if they can make that happen.
Okay, I will work with them.
Yeah.
Who's that? Go ahead.
Yeah, Tom O'Halloran. If you would be interested, you were talking a little earlier about the cost share program and stream fencing, and that is one of the counties of the Culpeper District. We have 5 of them, and stream fencing has taken off like wildfire. We actually had almost 4 times the cost share this year, which we thought was going to be a real challenge to get it on the ground. But to be honest with you, it's all gone. The farmers have, the ag community has stepped up. And if you like, we could give the district could give a little presentation on the advances and the progress we've made on the stream fencing, particularly in Culpeper District. That's when we 5 counties, but a lot of it's in Madison County.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that would be a good time to hear about that as well. Then we can put that on the agenda as well.
Okay.
Any other members have any other potential items or comments, final comments? Then I will move for adjournment. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Eldon, do you have anything else?
Pardon me?
Do you have anything else before I?
No, just glad to make it through our first and sole virtual meeting.
Yep. Thank you all for all the staff. We've done a good job, and I think we've did the best we can in this format.
I do have one last thing. For the new members, I'll be getting in touch with you. By this time in your first year, I would normally have met with you with your commission handbook, but obviously that hasn't happened. And between now and the September meeting, somehow we will meet individually, either virtually or in person, and I'll get your handbook to you.
Definitely. Again, with that, I will thank everyone, and we will see you in September. And good luck as you continue to mitigate this COVID time. Thanks, Eldon. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.